Hey guys, Daniel Gillespie here with UponArriving.com, and in this video I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about the Chase reconsideration line and your Chase application status. So what is a Chase reconsideration call? Basically, it's your chance to persuade a bank analyst to approve you for your credit card application. And there really are two goals in this, and they overlap a lot. The first is to show that you are not a credit risk. And this has to do with things like showing your credit score, payment history, utilization, and your inquiries into accounts. And the second purpose is to show that you are not an unprofitable customer. And so this again has to do with things like new accounts, hard inquiries, reasons for getting the card, and spend that you put on the card, and also your income. So keep in mind these two goals as you go through a recon call, and these can kind of guide you to make sure that you're making and saying the right types of things during the call. So first I want to talk about preparing for a Chase recon call. Now, if you have already applied for your credit card, these tips may not apply to you right now, but in the future they can definitely help you, so you still want to check these out. So the first thing that you want to do is to put spend on your other Chase cards, okay? Nothing looks worse when you apply for a Chase card if you have, say, 3 other cards that have been inactive for the last 12 months with 0 purchases put on those cards. That's going to look really bad in the eyes of Chase. So you want to make sure that you have put recent spend on your cards. And how can you do that? Well, some people will just reload their Amazon account with a $1 reloadable credit from their cards, which is one way to go. But if you want to get a little bit more advanced with it, you might, for example, put just some random purchases on your cards over the next couple of months. I think it looks really natural if you have, say, like $120 here, $58 here, $12 there on your cards, versus just one day of $1 purchases across all of your cards. If the analyst was manually reviewing your other accounts, that could just look a little bit fishy. The second thing that you might consider doing is opening up a bank account with Chase. This is mostly for people who have limited credit profiles. They're kind of new to the game. They don't have any Chase cards. Chase really likes it when you have some sort of relationship with them. So a banking relationship can be a great way to kind of get that going. Try to keep your bank account open for maybe 3 to 6 months, and that should be enough to kind of establish that relationship with Chase. And then maybe you want to jump on a card like a Chase Freedom card and ride that card for 6 to 12 months, and then you'd be in prime position to go for a premium card. And that's a great way to go from basically having very little history at all to being having pretty good odds to getting one of the better Chase cards. The next thing that you really want to pay attention to are the Chase application rules. Okay, these are rules like the 524 rule, the 230 rule, the 24 or 48 month rule. These are very specific application rules that if you are violating them, your chances of getting approved for a card are pretty much 0. So you really need to make sure that you're not in violation of any of these rules, and you need to keep in mind that they are constantly in flux, always changing, and so you need to make sure that you have the most up-to-date versions of these rules. So you can check the link below to see all of the different Chase application rules you should know about and kind of see what is the developing news with them. The next thing that you can do is you can lower your credit limits. This is mostly for people who are at what's called LOL 24. Basically, they've been really busy with credit cards over the past year or two, and what they want to do is they want to try to get automatically approved. And the reason is, if they go into a recon call, it's going to be pretty much impossible to explain with a straight face why they've opened 37 cards over the past 2 years. Okay, it's just really not doable. And so what they want to do is lower their credit limits on one or more cards. And the thinking is that, well, hey, Chase already approved me for $5,000 or $10,000 worth of this credit here. So if I lower it and then I apply for a new card, Chase may automatically just reapprove me for that same amount. This strategy can backfire a little bit, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So those are all tips for preparing for a Chase recon call. And now I'm going to move on to whether or not you should call into Chase reconsideration. So should you call into the Chase reconsideration line? Whenever you're denied for your application, it's pretty obvious that yes, you should go ahead and call, right? Because there's nowhere else to go. You've pretty much hit the end of the line, and there's just really nothing else to do except to call. So it's pretty obvious in that situation. but it's less obvious when it comes to your application going to pending. And there are 3 different types of pending messages that you can get, and you really need to know the differences between these before you choose to call Recon or not. So the first type of message is the 30-day message. This just means that your application is pending. Essentially, it's in limbo, and chances are that an analyst or the computer has not had a chance to process it yet. And in this case, you just want to wait it out. The next message is the 2-week message. This usually means that you will get approved for your card almost all the time. Okay, so if you see the 2-week message, you should be really happy. You will likely get approved for your card. Now, if you get the 7 to 10-day message, it gets a lot trickier. Odds are you will probably get denied. It usually is bad news if you get the 7 to 10-day message, but not always. Sometimes Chase just wants to verify your ID, and this can be a really quick process of you simply just calling up Chase and giving them some, answering some security questions, giving them some personal information, and within seconds you might get approved. Other times it's a little bit more tedious. You may have to go and fax in some documents, or you may have to get something notarized, and it can be a real headache. But make sure you pay attention to any time frames they give you, because a lot of times they give you these really tight windows of only a few days to verify your ID, so really try to stay on top of those. Now, these messages can change back and forth, and it can be a little bit confusing. Sometimes a message can change within 1 to 2 days, sometimes 1 to 2 weeks. So it really is just kind of case specific, but what you can do is you can check the Chase application status checker, okay? And there are a couple of ways you can do this. You can do this online if you already have an account. There's a new feature where you simply log into your account and then enter in some information, and you can check on your application status. You can send in a secured message, although that's going to take a while to get a message back. But the easiest way is just to call the automated status checker phone line, and you can find the phone number for that in one of the links below. But this is just the phone line. You'll call, you'll input some basic information, and then you'll get some sort of message about the status of your application. You need to be careful though, because sometimes they transfer you to a live analyst. So if you're not ready to talk to anybody, or if you just don't want to, just hang up the phone and maybe check back at some other time. So once you've decided to call into the Chase Recon line, now you want to know how to handle those phone calls. And I have several tips for dealing with these phone calls. The first is to just remain calm. Just remember, at the end of the day, this is just a private phone conversation with you and someone else. There's no reason to get super nervous about it. I remember when I first made my very first Recon call, I was pretty nervous. But after that, I got used to it, and it's really a very low pressure situation. So try not to get really nervous. If you do get nervous, then maybe ask your partner or someone else if they can do the call for you. I mean, obviously, if there is a gender difference between the two of you, you may have to have some kind of a voice alteration thing happening there. But for the most part, you should be okay handling it yourself. So the call will usually start off with you verifying your information, and this is your basic name, maybe some personal info like your social or something like that. But they also will verify any details you put into your credit card application, okay? And this includes your income. So this is a big thing to note. If you are including income from, say, a spouse or some other family member, make sure you notated what that number is, okay? Because nothing is worse than putting in a number, forgetting about it, and then calling into Recon, and then right off the bat giving contradictory information, especially about your income. It's not going to be a good start to your Recon call. So make sure that you notate that income number and any other details that look pretty important, like maybe your assets. After you verify your information, the credit analyst may take a break, may kind of go back, check with their superiors, and then we'll come back and usually have questions for you. The questions kind of vary depending on your credit profile, but generally you can expect to be asked why you want the card, okay? So one of the most important things that you want to do in a Recon call is to have a legit reason for wanting that card. And there are a few different reasons that I would consider to be very legitimate for getting a new card. Some examples of legit reasons for getting the card: maybe you want to segregate your expenses. So let's say you've just opened up an online business or two, and now you need to segregate your expenses. So it totally makes sense that you would need 1 to 2 cards. Another great reason for wanting a card is if you're switching loyalty programs. So maybe you were flying out of an American hub and you moved and now you're flying out of a United hub. That's a great reason for getting a card, but just make sure that you know which airlines that Chase partners with, because it would look really bad if you were trying to persuade them by telling them that you're now a Delta loyalist. Another fantastic reason for getting cards relates to credit card benefits. So maybe some cards have specific perks that you're just really drawn to. These are things like primary rental car coverage or maybe trip delay. I mean, there's a long list, baggage delay of different specific benefits that could attract somebody to that card. And you just need to make sure that you are actually picking a benefit that that card has, because even me, I'm immersed in the credit cards world and I get confused all the time. So, make sure that you are actually finding a benefit that that card has and not getting cards confused. So the number one thing not to say is that you want the card just because of the sign-up bonus. This goes back to the whole showing that you are not an unprofitable customer, okay? Unprofitable customers are those who are going to just seek out cards for the sign-up bonuses, earn the bonus, and then put the card to sleep. So you can imagine if you don't have active spend on your other cards and you mention something about how much you love the 50,000 points you're going to get, that's going to look really bad and you're going to look like a bad customer in the eyes of Chase. Another tip that I have is to not sound too knowledgeable. And what I mean by this is try not to sound overly sophisticated, like you know more about the Chase application rules than the credit analyst does, okay? So you don't really want to go around talking a lot about 524 or the 230 rule, these rules that are kind of unstated and that the general public probably wouldn't know about, okay? Because then it's going to look like you're going to be drawing attention to yourself like you just know a little bit too much about these rules. I think it's a little bit different if the rule is explicitly in the terms and conditions. If it says that you can't get this bonus if you've had it in the last 48 months or something like that, that's a little bit different. It's also different if they are denying you on the basis of a rule, like it sounds like if they bring up 524 or you've opened too many accounts in the past 24 months and you know that you haven't, well then in that case I would bring it up. But try to just remain a little unsophisticated. So there's a chance that you'll have to answer questions about certain details on your credit report, okay? So certain things that will usually come up. A big one is new accounts or hard inquiries, right? So if you've had a lot of recent applications, a lot of new accounts opened, this is probably something that they will want to ask you about. And this is why I love giving the reason of segregating expenses for getting a credit card, because it makes sense of why you would want the credit card in the first place and why you may have multiple cards, because hey, maybe you're starting multiple online businesses and you need to segregate those expenses for each business, or maybe you have some other budgetary reason for doing that. But anything that kind of explains why you would have recent cards opened is going to help you. If you've had 36 cards open in the past couple of years, there's really not much that you can say, and you just kind of have to hope that luck goes your way that day, because there's really nothing you can say about that. If you have high utilization, this can be a tricky one, right? So if you have cards that are maxed out or nearly maxed out, it can be a little difficult to explain to a credit analyst why you should still get approved. I have seen some people explain this to analysts and just tell them like, hey, I had a really big purchase. Maybe there was a wedding that happened, or a cruise they took or something, and they're about to pay it off or pay it down. That can work, but the analyst has to take your word for it, and they may not always do that, especially if it's a really big balance or you have multiple maxed out cards. So that one can be a little tricky to explain away. Another one that's really hard to explain away is negative marks. So if you have bankruptcies or you have any kind of collections from the past, that can be a little bit difficult to explain away. I would always stress the time difference between the date you're applying and the date of the delinquency, especially if it's multiple years have gone by with the late payments or whatever it is. Just try to stress how there's been a lot of time in between that period, and try to reiterate how loyal of a customer you've been. If maybe talk about your bank account and your 100% payment history with Chase, or try to focus on the positive as much as you can, but sometimes Chase can be pretty strict about late marks when it comes to recon calls. The final tip I have is shifting credit. Now this is like one of the most common ways to get approved for multiple Chase cards. Okay, after you've been approved for maybe 3 or 4 cards, your credit limit is going to get to a point where Chase won't really want to approve you for more credit. And this is usually around 40 to 50% of your income. Okay, so once you get in that range, you need to start thinking about shifting credit. And basically all you do is shift credit from one card to another, and that's how you get approved. Now you need to be mindful about the minimum credit limits. So for example, the Chase Sapphire Reserve is a Visa Infinite card, so you would need $10,000 worth of free credit. Other cards like a Visa Signature, they may want you to have $5,000. So you want to make sure that you have enough to get approved for the specific card that you want. And this goes back to what I was saying about lowering your credit limits before you apply. If you lower your credit limits too much, then that can backfire because you won't really have credit to shift around. So you really have to think about it. If you think that you're going to really need to shift credit to get approved, maybe you don't want to try to lower your credit limits, okay? Another thing is that the Chase representatives won't always give you this option. Sometimes you have to bring it up or you have to mention it. So maybe if they're talking about, they're kind of wishy-washy on if you'll be approved or not, you can just kind of throw it out there like, oh, hey, you know, I'm willing to transfer credit over from this card to that card if possible. You will have to keep minimum credit lines on certain cards. Sometimes this can be pretty low, around $1,000 or so, maybe even $500. So always try to inquire with the Chase reps about the lowest that you can go with your card. So what should you do if Chase denies you after your recon call? Well, I suggest that you call back and try it again. I would try to call at least maybe 2, maybe 3 times. And the reason is Chase will most of the time notate whenever you've called, right? So if you call for a second time, let's say 15 minutes after your first call, they often will start off the conversation with, oh yes, Mr. Gillespie, I see you just called 15 minutes ago. And then in that case, you kind of have to make yourself appear like you're not just like going crazy about getting this card. And what you can do though is you can just sort of explain to them that you're trying to clarify something. So usually what I would say is, oh yes, I did just call, so-and-so said something about XYZ, and I just wanted to clarify this or that. Or maybe you can get really specific about something that you failed to do, like, oh yeah, I just realized that I didn't really explain why I had 6 accounts open in the last 6 months or whatever. And so you want to give it a shot, hang up, call again, sort of a mantra, and give it a shot a few times. But if you don't have success after that 3rd time, you probably just want to chalk it up as an L and maybe try again in another 30 to 60 days. So how long can you wait to call into the Chase Recon line? Typically your application will be canceled after about 30 days. So you don't want to wait over a month to call into the Recon line. In fact, I would try to call in about a week's worth of time. If you wait after 30 days or a month to call in, they pretty much will just run another hard pull on your credit, okay? So you don't want to do that. So that's really it for the Chase Reconsideration line. I just highly suggest that you go through these tips. You make sure that you're prepared for the phone call, that you know when you should call or not, and that you have a good reason for the card, and you are prepared to explain away any of the potential questions that might be given to you. And also keep in mind that these tips are for personal cards. The business reconsideration line can be a bit more daunting, and I'll probably make a video for that later. So this only really applies to personal cards, and also you can apply a lot of this to other issuers like Citi if you're calling their reconsideration line, because it really all kind of boils down to the same thing of showing that you are not at credit risk and that you are not going to be an unprofitable customer. So if you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, be sure to subscribe and make sure that you hit that like button.